In 2011, in Japan, there was a small house. Today is Monday, a day that should be busy with work, but Haruko is still sound asleep in bed, as she has no need to go to work. Haruko is a manga artist. Although her work is not highly regarded, she is not anxious because when she married her husband Mikio, he promised to take care of her for life, and all she needs to do is create manga at home with peace of mind. Haruko often feels like a lucky woman, with a loving husband, living a life free from labor and well taken care of. Even when she receives a notice from her editor about the magazine's suspension, Haruko merely sighs and continues her daily life as usual. While Haruko is fast asleep, her husband Mikio has already finished washing up and is in the kitchen preparing bento for both himself and his wife. Mikio is meticulous and diligent. He pairs the bento with corresponding cheese based on the date. For example, today is Monday, which means Swiss cheese and a blue tie. At this moment, the pet lizard they keep at home crawls over, and Mikio casually tosses a few pieces of vegetable leaves to it. Watching the pet eat with great appetite, he can't help but feel his eyes well up. He too longs for such a good appetite, to be carefree like this lizard. Before going to work, Haruko notices her husband's red eyes and assumes he hasn't rested well, casually reminding him before intending to go back to sleep. But later, she discovers her husband's phone left on the table. Haruko quickly picks it up and rushes outside, only to find her husband hasn't gone far. He is just standing there, staring blankly at the trash can at the entrance. Haruko's appearance startles Mikio awake. He doesn't want his wife to notice something is off, so he hurriedly adjusts his emotions and walks towards the company. As soon as he steps into the crowded subway car, feeling the same oppressive sensation that has persisted for years, a familiar sense of frustration wells up in his chest, making it difficult for Mikio to breathe. Mikio works in the customer service department of an online company, often dealing with customer complaints. Long-term exposure to negative emotions, combined with the pressure of work targets, has gradually thrown Mikio's once calm heart out of balance. Today, he has to face difficult customers as usual and must force himself to respond to his superior's criticisms. After enduring the morning, during lunch break, he looks at the bento he made himself but has no appetite at all. Mikio doesn't understand what is wrong with him. There are no physical ailments, but he feels a persistent knot in his heart. When he returns home in the evening, looking at the stew his wife specially prepared on the table, he still has no appetite even after not eating all day. Meanwhile, Haruko watches her husband's dejected back and recalls how he stood by the trash can this morning, feeling a vague sense of something being off. In the 5 years of their marriage, Mikio has never acted as strangely as he does now. The next morning, Mikio was supposed to get up as usual to prepare lunch, but he held the knife for cutting cheese and was unable to make the cut for a long time. Mikio suddenly felt a splitting headache and even had thoughts of ending everything, thinking that this would relieve his suffering. Seeing this, Haruko was wide awake and advised her husband to take a day off and go to the hospital for a checkup. After a series of examinations, Mikio was unexpectedly diagnosed with depression. The doctor told Mikio that depression is a state of persistently low mood that anyone can encounter. Usually, changing one's mood and relaxing appropriately can help alleviate it. But if one cannot rely on oneself to get out of it, it may indicate the onset of depression. As for the shoulder and headache that Mikio mentioned, they are common physical symptoms of depression and should not be overly concerning. Mikio just needs to take his medication on time and gradually improve the factors causing the illness, and he will eventually get better. This process takes about 6 months to see results. While waiting to pick up his medication at the pharmacy, Mikio called his wife to explain his condition. After hanging up the phone, the usually careless Haruko opened her diary and began to reflect. It seemed that several months ago, there were already some signs of depression in her husband. She had made his favorite mixed rice, but he couldn't eat it no matter what. He often complained about back pain or waist pain. His sleep quality was poor at night, and his snoring often disturbed her sleep. However, at that time, both Haruko and Mikio did not take it seriously, which led to the situation developing to this point. But Haruko knew very little about depression. While searching for information online, she also called her mother to find out how to help her husband recover quickly. Her mother advised Haruko not to be overly anxious. It might just be that Mikio was under too much work pressure, and taking a few days off to relax would help. To many people, it seems that such mental illnesses can be cured simply by adjusting one's mindset. On the other side of the pharmacy, Yamamoto, also a depression patient, shook his head at Mikio. He knew well that fighting against depression is a long process, and Mikio might not be able to endure the side effects caused by the medication in the early stages of treatment. Feeling reassured by her mother, the initially panicked Haruko sat back down at her desk and began to brainstorm ideas for her next serialized comic. Unexpectedly, her mother, who only appeared calm on the surface, soon sent a stack of faxes stating that eating more vegetables is beneficial for depression patients, urging her daughter to hurry to the supermarket to buy some fresh vegetables for Mikio. However, Haruko felt weak and exhausted, and it took her a long time to barely carry 2 bags of vegetables back home. She had no desire to draw in the afternoon, and, following the recipes she found online, carefully prepared a table full of vegetable-based dishes. Moreover, since the comic serialization had already been halted, she had plenty of time. Even though his body was sending serious alarms, Mikio was still concerned about Haruko's comic career. He looked at his wife and seriously reminded her that she always tended to think negatively when faced with difficulties and was quick to give up, which was a hard-to-correct flaw. She should persist and fight until the last moment in anything she did. After all, many readers were looking forward to her work. Haruko listened to her husband's nagging and helplessly waved her hand, telling him not to worry about her matters. His health should be the priority. Her husband's depression stemmed from previously being overworked and having too much stress without an outlet. It would be better for him to take this opportunity to rest and reduce unnecessary worries. However, Mikio did not see depression as a serious issue. He remembered the doctor saying that depression was like a cold of the mind, and anyone could encounter it. Moreover, the company had recently reduced staff due to layoffs, and if he took leave again, his colleagues would surely be overwhelmed. He insisted that he was most aware of his own physical condition and had not reached the point where he needed to take leave. But after a day at work, Mikio only felt that his symptoms worsened and the pain was unbearable. Haruko understood that Mikio was a person with a strong sense of responsibility, whether towards work or managing the family. Even though she was already exhausted, he still tried his best to do well. Seeing her husband still forcing himself to hold on, Haruko felt helpless and had to be firm with him. If he continued to delay resigning, they would get a divorce. After all, such a large company would not be affected by the absence of one person. But Haruko was different. She only had him. With Haruko's firm insistence, Mikio finally submitted his resignation. However, because he needed to handle the work handover, he still had to continue working until the 25th of this month. So every morning before leaving, Haruko would repeatedly remind Mikio. If he encountered difficult clients at work, he did not have to force himself and could simply avoid them. Nothing was more important than her husband's emotions. Under this mindset, Mikio felt that he seemed to improve a lot. On his way to work, he even found the leisure to appreciate the blooming camellias by the roadside. However, during a follow-up visit, the doctor told him that the emotional fluctuations of depression were like a pendulum, swinging between good and bad without a fixed pattern. But overall, it was slowly improving along a spiral trajectory. The doctor suggested that Mikio develop a habit of keeping a diary starting today. It didn't need to be very detailed. Even jotting down the symptoms he experienced that day or fleeting thoughts that crossed his mind would be fine. This was an important part of cognitive behavioral therapy. Only by truly recognizing that he had depression and learning to accept its existence could Mikio truly reconcile with his illness and gradually step out of the emotional swamp. As the doctor said, after the brief, uplifting state during the day fades away, that unbearable feeling of oppression returns at night. Mikio, feeling uncomfortable, tossed and turned in bed, suddenly overwhelmed by despair, worried that his condition would continue to fluctuate like this. Fearing it would affect Haruko, Mikio advised her not to focus all her attention on him, and to live her life as she used to, painting when she needed to, and following her usual rhythm. Haruko simply smiled at Mikio and said, "Your mood swings are quite serious. This condition should not be taken lightly." Mikio took a deep breath, just about to step out of the house, when he noticed his wife, who usually loved to sleep in, already dressed neatly and standing beside him. It turned out that today was Mikio's last day at work, and Haruko wanted to accompany her husband for the final stretch of his commute. This was Haruko's first time truly stepping into Mikio's life outside of their home. At that moment, she stood in the crowded subway car, finding it difficult even to turn around, yet her heart surged with indescribable emotions. She realized that her husband had to squeeze into such a throng of people every day for work, but to avoid worrying her, Mikio had never uttered a word of complaint all these years. Haruko felt both warmth and sorrow in her heart, thinking that her husband was truly too good to her. With a choked voice, Haruko expressed her gratitude, causing the originally silent Mikio to suddenly break down and cry. He had worked hard to support the family for many years without ever complaining. Wasn't it all to earn this deep affection from his wife? Just thinking about not having to go to the office tomorrow and facing the pressure of performance made Mikio feel a wave of relief wash over him. Even when dealing with difficult clients, he could wear a slight smile and communicate patiently. After sending Mikio off to work, Haruko met her friend Mami. Not long ago, Mami had asked her to hand-draw an illustration for this year's alumni gathering invitation. This so-called alumni gathering originated from 5 years ago when several newlyweds, including them, held their weddings at the same church in the countryside. Since then, every year, they would hold an alumni gathering to relive the warm scenes of that time. Considering her husband's health condition, it was highly likely that Haruko and Mikio would not be able to attend this year's gathering. Unexpectedly, Mami revealed that this would be her last time participating in the event, as she would be filing for divorce with her husband right after the gathering. Upon hearing this, Haruko felt an overwhelming sense of emotion. After returning home, she took out their wedding photo from that year. 5 years was enough time to change many things, and even the once loving couple like Mami and her husband had reached a point of parting ways. Fortunately, she and Mikio remained steadfast with only each other. Mikio happily completed his resignation procedures and went to the hospital for a follow-up check the next morning. Shanpu learned that he had resigned directly and couldn't help but curiously ask, "Did your family not raise any objections?" Mikio couldn't help but show a hint of shy smile. How could there be any objections? If he didn't resign, his wife would be the one to get angry. Mikio and Haruko's relationship made Shanpu envious. He had developed depression precisely because of his divorce. Although Mikio was quite carefree when he resigned, the reality soon surfaced. Haruko had no stable income, and the only economic pillar was now at home sick. They could only rely on unemployment benefits to live, and their quality of life would inevitably not be as good as before. But at this moment, Haruko, looking at her happy husband in the courtyard, felt that all her efforts were worth it. In the past few years, it was Mikio who worked hard outside to support the family. Now that her husband was sick, it was her turn to take care of him. Haruko was not afraid of hardship. She only hoped Mikio could recover soon. However, Mikio, accustomed to being busy, on his first day of staying home after resigning, could have slept in but couldn't find peace due to his depression and didn't want to nap during the day either. Mikio felt that by not working and not bearing the family expenses, he had become a useless person, and perhaps it wouldn't be long before his wife would grow to despise him. Haruko pulled Mikio to lie down together and advised him not to carry such a heavy psychological burden. When her husband used to work, she often napped on the floor like this. Life after resigning was far from as easy as imagined. Mikio had shackled himself with mental chains, always fixated on past mistakes. He stubbornly believed he was a burden, dragging the entire family down. Mikio even blamed himself for Haruko's serialized work being put on hold. Haruko had repeatedly tried to comfort him for nearly a month, but Mikio remained trapped in the quagmire of self-blame. She truly had no other choice but to invite her husband's older brother, Kimura, to their home, hoping he could console Mikio. Unexpectedly, Kimura's arrival only intensified Mikio's anxiety. Kimura's words were filled with worries about the mortgage and tuition, as if he had already taken on the heavy burden of the head of the family. This made Mikio feel even more guilty. After his brother left, he buried himself in the blankets and cried silently, repeatedly blaming himself for his incompetence. It was from this day on that Mikio shifted from having difficulty sleeping to being excessively sleepy, often sleeping all day and still feeling tired upon waking. He thought this kind of routine was very abnormal, but Haruko felt it was better than not being able to sleep before. Days passed, and the family's savings gradually dwindled. Haruko looked at the remaining 260,000 yen in her bank account and realized she needed to find a job as soon as possible. Her former classmate, Yoshimi, had already held her own art exhibition, while whether her new serialization could pass the editor's review was still uncertain. Why is it that I am so unfortunate? Haruko ultimately did not enter Shimi's art exhibition. She returned home dejectedly in the cold wind on the street. When Haruko opened the door to her home and saw her husband sleeping peacefully on the bed, the heavy sense of loss in her heart was suddenly replaced by a gentle feeling of contentment. It's okay. As long as Mikio is well and can sleep soundly, there is still hope for everything. Haruko crawled into bed, and the warmth coming from her husband instantly dispelled the bone-chilling cold she had caught in the wind. Winter quietly departed, and the cherry blossoms bloomed one after another in the spring breeze. Although Mikio's depression had not healed, the troubling feeling of drowsiness gradually dissipated with the departure of winter. He walked into the yard, the fresh scent of grass and trees lingering at his nose. Feeling refreshed, and his whole being presented an unprecedented spirit. Mikio wanted to cook a meal for Haruko, as she had been taking care of him attentively these days. However, he had not cooked for a long time, and his skills had long become rusty. Either the seasoning was off, or he struggled to control the heat, making him appear flustered. In his anxiety, he began to blame himself for not being able to do anything right, and couldn't help but burst into tears. Haruko had become accustomed to this. Mikio's emotions were still fluctuating wildly, but as long as his condition improved slightly compared to the past, it was a great comfort to her. That day, Haruko's parents came to visit Mikio. When Mikio was not around, her mother quietly advised Haruko that the halfway point of Mikio's recovery was the most dangerous stage, and she must take good care of him. Haruko had only recently come to understand that she should not always be entangled in the reasons for Mikio's depression, nor should she insist on forcibly pulling him out of the shadows of his emotions. Instead, she should think about the meaning of her husband's illness itself, learn to accept his disease, and embrace his current state. If Mikio wants to cry, let him cry. If he wants to sleep, let him sleep. It is enough that she can be by his side, just like she told Mommy that day. If you feel that struggling alone after a divorce is too hard, you don't have to force yourself to push forward. Just maintain a calm mind. Her husband has depression, and his emotions are already in a state of imbalance. If she continues to force him to quickly emerge from the shadows, wouldn't that worsen his condition? That day while out for a walk, Mikio's gaze met that of a small turtle. The two of them quietly looked at each other, as if drawn by a wonderful fate. Haruko immediately decided to buy the small turtle along with the fish tank. However, this expense further reduced her already meager savings. Because of this, Haruko became even more determined to personally go to the magazine office the next day to seek job opportunities from the editor. Relying on unemployment benefits to get by is ultimately not a long-term solution. Mikio was filled with self-blame as he recalled his promise to Haruko that she could just focus on drawing at home, yet now she had to bear the burden of supporting the family. Haruko smiled and told her husband not to think too much. She said that her choice to draw manga stemmed from a true passion in her heart, and wasn't Mikio always saying that she could become an excellent manga artist? So Haruko reassured her husband that she was only temporarily earning some living expenses and that she would never give up on drawing manga. The next day, Haruko went to the magazine office. She candidly informed the editor that her husband was suffering from depression and urgently needed a job to cover their basic daily expenses. The editor then introduced Haruko to Murakami, the head of the neighboring department. The work Haruko was going to be responsible for was completely different from her previous manga creation. It involved illustrating some psychology books. Murakami himself had also been a depression patient, and after falling ill, he was transferred from the competitive manga department to this position. Once Haruko returned home, she diligently began working on the tasks assigned by the editor. In fact, before today, she had never mentioned her husband's illness to anyone, simply because society holds too many prejudices and misunderstandings about depression. Haruko worried that no one would understand and did not want to be pitted. But later she realized that her previous concealment was due to her inner shame about her husband's depression, feeling it was difficult to speak of. So being able to say it openly today brought her great comfort. While Mikio was out for a walk, he unexpectedly learned that his former company had gone bankrupt due to poor performance. He returned home to tell Haruko this news, but Haruko's illustration work had recently hit a bottleneck, and repeatedly revising the line art left her feeling frustrated, with no time to respond to Mikio. However, Mikio persisted, pointing to the layout and showing Haruko that the printing house had misspelled her name, urging her to quickly call the person in charge to correct it. With her creative thoughts repeatedly disrupted and the pressure of supporting the family weighing heavily on her, Haruko momentarily lost control of her emotions and snapped at Mikio, telling him not to disturb her anymore. Mikio's smile instantly vanished. He felt utterly useless and unable to help his wife at all. That familiar sense of despair surged back into his heart, and he even thought that if he were no longer around, he wouldn't add any more trouble for his wife. Mikio quietly walked into the bathroom and turned on the shower head. On the other side, as Haruko was drawing, she suddenly felt her heart racing violently, followed by the sound of rushing water in her ears. She instantly realized something was wrong and rushed into the bathroom, stopping Mikio just in time. Looking at her husband, who was crying uncontrollably, Haruko felt a wave of fear wash over her. She regretted taking out her frustrations about her creative struggles on him. Haruko tightly embraced Mikio, promising over and over again that she would never give up on him. Mikio had long been enduring the treatment for the sake of his wife. Whenever Haruko showed even a hint of impatience, he would lose the motivation to keep going. But after this incident, Haruko's eyes, filled with fear and regret, lingered in Mikio's heart, suddenly awakening him. From today onward, he would strive for himself to overcome the illness. Only by truly getting better could he ensure his wife's well-being and find true happiness. Not long after, on the day Haruko submitted her work, Murakami reviewed her drawings and recognized her professional level. Haruko took the opportunity to express her doubts. Then why was her previous comic series halted? Murakami told her that editors can actually sense whether creators have true passion for their work. And was what Haruko expressed in her previous series truly what she wanted to convey? Murakami's words were like a ray of light, dispelling the fog in Haruko's heart and instantly giving her a new direction for her creation. As soon as she returned home, Haruko sat at her desk and began to create, inspired by her pet lizard. She had already decided to use her brush to record all the little moments spent with her husband. When Haruko showed the first draft of her new comic to her original editor, the editor was immediately moved by the genuine emotions expressed in the work and promptly finalized the serialization details with Haruko. The doctor said that depression is also somewhat related to sunlight exposure. Recently, the continuous rainy days made Mikio feel utterly exhausted, and his previously slightly improved mental state fell back into a low point. But when the long rainy season finally passed, Mikio slowly regained his spirits. Haruko had long been accustomed to his emotional ups and downs, accompanying him without complaint, always by his side. Now, it had been a whole year since Mikio was diagnosed with depression. In this year, they missed a class reunion. This time, Mikio took the initiative to express his desire to attend with his wife. However, on the way to the church where the reunion was held, Mikio repeatedly felt the urge to back out. He feared the judgment of others and was afraid of those strange looks. But Mikio also understood that if he truly wanted to recover and return to a normal life, he had to take this step. At the reunion, when it was Mikio's turn to speak, he stood in the church where he had made marriage vows with Haruko, feeling a mix of emotions that were hard to express. He admitted that he had not attended the reunion last year because he had been suffering from depression. At that time, he truly found it difficult to accomplish anything. Haruko also endured tremendous pressure because of his illness, but she never complained of being tired. Instead, she always encouraged him with a smile, telling him not to force himself and to let everything happen naturally. For Haruko, the past year was incredibly challenging, yet it was also a year filled with rewards. Through this year's trials, she finally understood the vows read at their wedding. In sickness and in health, in wealth and in poverty, she is willing to love this man deeply, respect him, comfort him, and support him. And just as the vows stated, Haruko and Mikio became true partners in every sense. After the class reunion, a firm idea took root in Haruko's mind. She wanted to create a comic about depression. This is clearly a condition that is not uncommon, so why is people's understanding of it so lacking? This comic is not only to document Mikio's struggle against depression, but also a story that belongs to both her and Mikio. As soon as Mikio returned home, he actively pulled out the diary he had kept for a year, hoping that these authentic emotional records could provide some support for Haruko's creation. Mikio recalled the moment he almost made a foolish decision in the bathroom, when Haruko pulled him back from the edge of despair and helped him regain his ability to feel love. Looking at his wife beside him, Mikio suddenly felt enlightened. Those precious things had always been by his side, never changed. It was just that people mistakenly thought they had lost them. As long as one calms down and searches carefully, they will find that they are actually within reach. Combining her own experiences with her husband's diary, Haruko created a comic that records their daily fight against depression together. On the first day the comic samples were printed, Mikio also brought back good news. After this checkup, the doctor informed him that he could stop taking medication. Although the chances of depression relapsing are not low, and stopping medication does not mean he can be completely at ease, for Mikio, this was already a significant step forward. Now, Mikio still finds it difficult to work outside like a normal person, but with his wife's comic career thriving, he simply started a company at home, specifically to manage Haruko's comic works and related derivative affairs. Once Haruko's comic was released, it immediately received widespread acclaim. At the new book launch, Mikio candidly admitted that he often found it hard to speak about his depression. What changed his mind was his wife, Haruko. She always told him that being sick is never something to be ashamed of. Everyone, at any time and in any place, has the right to feel proud and honored for being their most authentic selves. This book depicts many of his most embarrassing moments. But now, he feels a sense of pride for the person he was in the book, even for that self who once gave up on himself and was filled with guilt. Mikio has not fully recovered yet, but in the days to come, he plans to learn to cope with this troublesome condition more calmly. Perhaps this is the best way to find his true self. After the speech, Haruko stood side by side with her husband, gazing up at the clear blue sky. She knows in her heart that Mikio will still have to continue fighting against depression in the future. However long the dark night may be, it will eventually welcome the dawn, and even if the clear sky suddenly turns overcast, its brightness will far surpass the deepest darkness.